Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and this is take 2 on the quick Rui with Queen of E2. This is episode 26, and you can maybe say episode 26B, I guess. The first one, I had a problem with the volume, so I'm going to re-record it for you guys, and hopefully this one will be even better than the first. We'll see. Anyway, it'll be more audible, and in that sense, it's certainly going to be better. Well, as I said, we're going to discuss variations where white plays Queen to E2. And these come in two flavors, although they often transpose one to the other. So one version is with Queen to E2 right here on move 5. The second version begins with castling and then bishop to E7 and only now Queen to E2. Often these will simply transpose into each other, but there are a couple of little points that are worth discussing. Mainly, the issue is what you avoid by playing one move order or the other. So, by playing Queen to E2 on move 5, one thing you avoid is having to worry about the open Rui Lopez. So that, of course, is taken care of by Queen to E2 on move 5. On the other hand, if you play Queen to E2 here, then while after B5, bishop to B3, black can play bishop to E7 here, which is our main move. This is going to be the move that we spend the most time talking about. There is also the possibility of bishop to C5. Now, it's certainly granted that after castles here too, black could play B5, bishop to B3, and bishop to C5. But here, white is not going to play Queen to E2. I mean, you should play the variations that we talked about last time with A4, C3, and so on. So this is not nearly as dangerous for black when white is already committed to Queen to E2. So that's the advantage of castling first. So the problem is that you have to worry about the open Rui Lopez. So there is quite a bit of theory on that. If you hate seeing it, then play Queen to E2 on move 5. On the other hand, if you want to cut out the bishop to C5 systems, then castle first, and go about it that way. Because again, nothing wrong with B5, bishop B3, bishop C5 really, but it's just a different way to go. And here again, you have better moves than Queen to E2. All right, so let's go back to the immediate Queen to E2. B5, bishop to B3, and now, oh, I should say one other thing here, and that's with black. It's most accurate to play B5 immediately. You can play bishop to E7 here, because you're not losing a pawn. If bishop takes C6, then D takes C6, knight E5, queen E4. So you regain the pawn. That's no problem. But after C3, B5, while white could play bishop to B3 and transpose to the main line, there's the other option, the added option of bishop to C2. So if you think bishop to C2 is of negative value for white, or at least is inferior compared to bishop to B3, it might be worth trying this move order to in your mind, sucker white into playing bishop to C2. But if there doesn't seem to be any special reason for you to do so, then you might as well not do it. Right? Why give your opponent more choices? It just gives you more work to do. So B5, bishop to B3. And now there's a fundamental decision for black, bishop to E7 or bishop to C5. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on bishop to C5, but I do need to say a little bit about it. All right, after bishop to C5, white plays C3, and now black generally castles, but can play D6 immediately as well. So first, let me talk first about castling. Now, here, the whole point of castling is that it keeps the option obviously open of playing D5. So after D3, you can play D6, but you can also play D5. And likewise, if white castles, again, black has the choice between D6 and also playing D5. All right, so I'm not going to say anything about the bishop to C5, D5 combination. I'm just going to let you know that it exists, but it's relatively rare, and I'm going to, again, focus very, very heavily on the bishop to E7 systems. All right, one other thing I should say, though, is that in case of D6, white can castle, but D3 is pretty normal. And here, it's not a bad idea for black to play H6. Just cut out this pin with the bishop going to G5. And that's a pinning idea we're going to see, in fact, quite regularly in as we go through these variations. So it's maybe even a useful rule of thumb. When you see d3 and white is ready to pin, stop it with h6. You can, however, allow the pin, so it's certainly not the end of the world. Castles, bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, and now black played kind of a typical idea known from the four knights, the Spanish four knights. Queen to e7, knight b to d2, and knight to d8. This was played in a game between Adams and Shirov in their candidates match back in 2007. I believe the game finished in a draw, although long, hard-fought draw. So black can play like this. It's not the end of the world to allow the pin, but in general, if you don't have to allow it, why bother? Make your life easier. Anyway, from here, h6 then, castles, and bishop to e3. And this setup has been played by Tivyakov, who's really the man for 5 queen e2. If you want to take this system up, then you want to put you want to create a database of Tivyakov's games to examine very carefully. I mean, he's been pretty loyal to this this approach for many years now. He's a very strong player. I mean, he's near 2,700. So, if anyone's going to be your guiding light through this variation, it's going to be him. But I have to say about this position that I don't really think he's achieved very much here. A standard way for black to proceed now is to swap, play knight a5, and then c5, kind of a Chigorin approach. The main line Ruy Lopez against, after 9h3, black plays knight a5, c5, and so on. So here, white plays knight b to d2, and now I think any normal Ruy Lopez move should be fine, like rook e8, queen c7, knight c6, and so on. And it seems to me that black is equal, and his results have been quite good too. All right, so that is all I'm going to say about bishop to c5. So let's get to bishop to e7, which I think is certainly the main line. All right, now here white has a choice. You can castle, which is what he usually does, but he can also play c3. And c3 has a little bit of independent value, depending on how things continue, but can often transpose to the main line. I mean, the main line, as I'm describing it, goes castles, and only now c3. All right, so c3 right away. And when you see c3 with black here, play d5. You could play castles. You could castle right away. But after d4, in fact, white has some chances. In general, this position is a little bit more tough for black to play when he can't get d5 in. It's not that he's in bad shape or anything, but white castles, plays rook to d1, and that puts some annoying pressure on the d file. Either black gives up the center by playing e takes d4, or else he has to do something about the threat of d takes e5. And there's not really any especially elegant way to do it. So, although maybe objectively black is all right here, white scores quite well in this position. So we should avoid this. And instead, after c3, play d5. This would be my recommendation. And not only my recommendation, I mean, it's a standard move, but definitely what I would propose for you guys to do. Now, we have to discuss a couple of things here. So, first of all, what happens if white tries to make it a kind of a martial gambit and grabs the pawn? Well, here, black should play like the old-fashioned martial. In other words, not play c6, but play knight to f6, and then, after castling, bring the bishop to d6. And it turns out that this position is really quite good for black. Maybe he's not better, but he certainly has full compensation. Let's say queen g5. I mean, if the queen goes back, then rook e8, bishop g4, and all of black's pieces just come flowing out. And the energy of those pieces is going to be directed very soon at the white king. So queen g5 at least tries to kind of interfere with things, but after rook to e8, it's still a very good position for black. His development is quite easy. He leads in development. There are still kingside attacking prospects. Black is doing just fine here. So for white, it would be safer, and it's more common, to decline this offer and play d3 instead. All right, black castles here. Here, bishop to g5 is not a big deal because the bishop is still on e7. So, okay, first of all, I want to say castling returns to the main line. We'll get back to this shortly. But, okay, bishop to g5. And this, again, has occurred in some of Tivyakov's games. For instance, Tivyakov-Adams from the FIDE Knockout World Championship in 1997. Also earlier this year, 2012, he played it. He won that game, but it was against a lower-rated player, and as far as the opening was concerned, black was doing fine. So play should continue like this: DE, DE, and then knight to D7, offering the trade of bishops. This is generally a good exchange for black, especially with this not having played G6 to weaken the king side. So bishop E3, now we push, knight A5, knight C4, drive both bishops back, bishop to B7, knight B to D2. And here, both of the Tivyakov games that I mentioned continue with knight takes D2, bishop D2 and C5. Black is certainly doing fine here. I would say this position is equal. But black might do even better to play knight to D6, keeping the pieces on. The knight is actually pretty well placed on D6, while white is going to have to spend some time unraveling, or let's say finishing this development. So I think black might even have a little bit of an edge here. Certainly, he's not worse. He's at least equal. Okay, so all of that was based on C3 and then D5. The main move here is to castle. Black castles. And again, C3. I mean, sooner or later, this is white's idea, to play C3, and if permitted, D4, Rook D1, and so on. So once again, when you see C3, play D5. So pretend it's a Marshall Gambit. Now, again, white has the option, has the choice to make between taking or playing D3. D3 is the main line. We'll come back to that in a moment, and this will be the last little detour. So E takes D5, knight D5, knight E5. And now, if black plays knight, takes E5, queen E5, and knight F6, it transposes to the position that we saw a moment ago. But instead of knight takes E5 here, there's also a very tricky move, knight F4. So this, well, let me continue one more move. Queen E4, and now knight takes E5. It's a very tricky position. White has three different pieces he can take, either knight or the rook on A8, but unless he makes just the right move here, he's going to be at least slightly worse, potentially significantly worse, or even losing. For instance, if he plays queen takes E5, he's probably just losing by force. Bishop to D6, and the queen can't go sideways anywhere, so she's got to go backwards. Queen E4. If queen E1, then rook E8, and so on. So queen E4, queen H4, threatening knight to H3 check, picking up the queen. So king H1, now bishop to G4. So here the rook is protected. Oh, I should address this. So why not queen takes A8 here? The answer, of course, is knight E2 check, and then queen takes H2 mate. So king H1, bishop G4. Now the rook on A8 is protected, and also because the rooks are connected, black is ready to play rook A to E8. So D4, rook A to E8, and here white has nothing better than queen takes F4. Black can either take immediately or play the little finesse rook to E2, because the queen can't leave the diagonal without allowing queen takes H2 mate. So something like king G1, and then just trading, well, not trading, but capturing the queen and then taking the pawn, leaves black with a 1 position, up the queen for 2 minor pieces. If instead white tries here G3, then queen to H3 wins. The threat is not just bishop takes queen now, but queen takes F1, checkmate. Okay, and then going back to here, if white tries to hold on to the queen and plays queen to C2, black probably has a lot of different winning moves, but the simplest and maybe the prettiest is bishop to F3. The point of this, or one main point of this, is that it prevents white from pushing his F-pawn, in which case the queen on C2 might be able to protect the G2 and H2 squares. But here, of course, that's impossible, and after G takes F3, queen H3, mate is unavoidable. Either queen G2 mate, queen takes F1 mate, or queen takes F3 check followed by queen takes G2 mate is going to happen. So that would be one example, and it's mate. All right, so going back to here, queen takes E5 is just bad. Queen takes the rook on A8 is also bad, because now black plays queen to D3, threatening a few things, including knight to E2 check, knight to G3 check, and queen takes F1 check, and then queen takes C1. So, well, you might think one idea is to play rook to E1. So that's a pretty obvious looking move. But now black shows that there's another threat, knight to H3 check. If king H1, then black can at the very least take that and go back for seconds and look for for a way to continue the attack, but it's also quite good. Or it's also you can also look at G takes H3. So here, knight F3 check, and if King G2, then knight takes E1 is check, and again the attack continues. There's also bishop takes H3 check, and then knight takes E1 check, and then rook takes A8. The bottom line is that white is just losing huge gobs of material. Here's just one variation that's possible of many, and black. Well, materially, white is doing okay, but positionally, he's just dead, and I'm not even sure if he can avoid checkmate here. Okay, finally, or not finally, we have one more capture to look at, and that's queen takes F4. And this is the best of the captures, although here too, black is better after knight to D3. I mean, this knight is extremely strong here, and black will continue building up his play on the king side, or against the king side with the bishops on D6 and B7. Okay, so does that mean that white is just worse here no matter what? Not yet. He does have one good move here, and that's D4. Ironically, not taking any of the pieces, but creating two new attacks on the black pieces. And this prevents knight to D3 from happening, this octopus knight. I mean, black can play knight to D3, but it's not the same as this situation. Okay, so D4, and now bishop to B7. Taking on E5 allows black to take on G2. That's not so good. Taking on F4 might not be that bad, but still at least knight to D3 is playable there. So queen takes B7 seems to be the best try. Knight E2, king H1, takes. And now either knight to D3 or knight takes and then queen to D3 should be good for equality. Black is still a pawn down, but very active in both cases, and really shouldn't have any serious difficulties here. In fact, I would put it the other way around. I mean, white, I think, is more likely to wind up with a worse position. So now we last turn to the main line with D3. And black really seems to be very comfortable. I mean, there isn't any obvious reason why black shouldn't be quite happy here. He's achieved D5 without any problem. He's not even sacrificing a pawn to get this in. And so with that in mind, I mean, white's not getting in D4. Black should equalize without too much difficulty. It's not to say that there aren't problems that still need to be solved, or that white can't win. Obviously, white can and has, but from a theoretical standpoint, it would be very surprising if it could turn out that white had an advantage in such a position. All right. Well, from here, black has three moves, two of which are probably interchangeable, and those are rook to E8 and bishop to B7. And bishop to B7 is the main line we're going to look at, and that continues with knight B to D2 and rook to E8. But there is a third option for white, which takes play, or sorry, for black, which takes play in a rather different direction, and that's D4. Here, white has scored quite well, and I'll quickly show you a couple of games, both played by Nigel Short, both won by white. Once Short had white, the other time he did it. The thing with D4 is that it's, from a strategic perspective, very logical. Black's idea is to play in some order or other D takes C3, and then, okay, let's say B takes C3 to keep D4 protected. Black plays bishop to G4, takes on F3 when he has to, and then plays B5 to B4, with the idea of creating this gaping hole on D4. So it's very logical. It's very well motivated. Let me put in some arrows here for you to kind of illustrate this. Okay, this pawn moves to C4 or takes, whatever. Black plays bishop G4, takes, and then D4 becomes the promised land for the black knight and for black's pieces in general. Well, that's the idea. It's good in theory. How does it work in practice? Well, first let's look at Short-Karpov from their 1992 candidates match, which was won by Short. So knight B to D2, bishop C5, bishop C2, bishop B6, knight B3. So now bishop to G4. It's time for that. H3, takes, A5. Okay, A3, A4, knight here, bishop A5. So he's still trying to pressure this pawn on C3. So in this case, he didn't make the capture on C3 just yet. But all the same, it still looks, well, okay, yeah, this is actually a different case. So here, it seemed as if black was getting what he wanted to after b takes c4. Because if white plays dc, black will enjoy the advantage, you could say, of the two knights versus the two bishops. I mean, white's got the bishop here, but neither has much by way of prospect. Black will play knight to c5, maybe even consider d3, even as a pawn sack in some cases to put the knight on d4, and black is really doing well. But Short's idea was to play rook f to c1. And, well, okay, the idea of that is just to put pressure on the c pawn and either force black to take on d3 or do something so that the light square bishop comes into the action so that there's going to be play on the c file and so on. All right, so queen d6, queen d1, and now finally we get to the idea that I had mentioned before. So the d4 square has finally been cleared. In fact, Karpov buries the knight here on d4, and so it looks as if this should be good times for black, at least like he should be all right. But it seems as if, in fact, white is really going to take control soon. So rook a2. One idea of this is to play bishop takes a4 without having to deal with any knight to e2 check surprises along the way. And Karpov found nothing better than just to take on c2, but now clearly white's remaining bishop is better than black's knight. Bishop to b4 is threatened. The a4 and c7 pawns are weak, and the game ended, in fact, rather quickly, on a blunder, admittedly, but a blunder induced by some serious positional pressure. So bishop to b4, queen takes d3. I mean, this was Karpov's idea, but, you know, if he doesn't do something to try to get pressure against white's pawn on d3, then black is simply going to suffer mightily the pressure against e5, c7, and a4. So rook f to d8, bishop b4, queen d3, just a blunder, rook to d2, and black loses his queen for just a rook and a couple of pawns, but it's not enough. So here Karpov resigned. Okay, back to this position after d4. Get rid of the color here. Nope, so much for that. Didn't work. Anyway, in a more recent game, Tivyakov against Short, played in Montreal in 2007, we'll see similar kind of concepts. Rook to d1, bishop g4. h3, takes, rook b8, knight to d2, g6, queen e2, and now takes, and b4. So we see the idea, and again, it looks great strategically. I mean, makes terrific sense. Black gets the d4 square. It's a gorgeous central square for his knight, and maybe his bishop could end up using it someday too. The d3 pawn is backward, but somehow it just doesn't work out the way it's supposed to. Tivyakov played bishop to a4 here, kicking the knight. Knight a7, and now nice little pawn sack. d4 takes, knight f3. Takes. And here, you can ask, well, what happened to black's dream of occupying and controlling the d4 square? I mean, that sure left in a hurry. So here, white is taking complete control over it. Again, black has a slew of weak queenside pawns. White has two very good bishops, and it's not surprising that Tivyakov won this game. Queen c8, e5, knight h5, e6. Just going forward. Queen takes e4 is bad because of rook to e4, a little skewer, kind of like what we saw in the short Karpov game. If f takes e6, then bishop to b3, or actually forget that, just bishop to d7 is quite good. So knight to b5, hitting the rook and blocking the path to d7. Well, the bishop's path to d7, not the rook's. Okay, and now bishop to b3. So the bishop finds very active employment on this diagonal instead. Short played f6. Okay, now the second bishop leaps into the fray. And now, I mean, you can see white has just perfect development here, while black's position is very, very much immobilized. Short decided to make a desperate gulp for air with knight to f5, but after takes, and then g4, the knight had to simply go in reverse. Knight to g7, queen to c2, preparing to round up this c-pawn before anything bad happens. f5, again, trying desperately to gulp for some freedom, but after knight e5, fg4, rook takes e7, Short was on his last legs. After queen takes e7, knight c6, if the queen were to go back, then e7 check, and rook to d8 would just finish the job. So Short instead played queen to g5, hoping to stir up some mischief here after knight takes b8 with g takes h3 check and queen g2 check, maybe h2 at some point, and so on. But Tivyakov simply played h4. The kingside lines stay closed, and not only knight takes b8, but e7 followed by rook to d8 is coming as well. And so Short gave up at this point. All right. So the bottom line is then that d4 is playable, but it's I'm not a big fan of it. I don't like allowing that bishop on b3 to just have this nice clear diagonal, and this rather academic plan of creating a hole on d4 and then occupying it with the knight proves more difficult than one might at first think to put into practice. So bishop to b7. This is simple and good. Knight b to d2, rook e8. And now white chooses generally between three moves. Rook to e1, a3, and rook to d1. And rook to d1 is traditionally the big idea for white in this kind of queen e2 system, but more often when he can play d4. I mean, if he's not able to open the d file, if he's not able to force it open, then it's less clear what the rook is exactly doing on d1, and this in turn becomes an argument for playing the basic systems where the rook goes to e1, and you wait and see what to do with the queen later on. Anyway, let's look at the variations here one at a time. Rook to e1 is going to be our main line. On a3, black can simply play queen to d7, although bishop to f8 has been the almost exclusive choice of the chess world, even or maybe especially at the highest levels. But Gustafsson, in his CD series, recommends queen to d7, and this certainly is a very good and logical move too. All right. So we won't really say much more about that. I mean, a3 is relatively rare. It's at least less common than rook e1. And the plan that black is going to choose is one we'll see against against rook to e1 as well. But first, let me mention rook to d1. This basically has one little finesse idea, which is this: that after queen to d7, knight f1, if black plays h6, which is going to be the recommendation of how to play against rook to e1, namely queen d7 and then h6, here white can play knight to e3. If the rook were on e1, black could just take and then play knight takes e4, but here it would hang the queen, and for that reason, obviously, it's not a very wise choice. So instead, though, black can play knight to a5, again, kind of a Chigorin-style approach if allowed. Now, this entails a pawn sack if white wants it. Knight e5, queen e6, takes, and d4. Black does have full compensation after bishop to d6. But anyway, but it's playable for white too. And if you're the kind of player who likes to grab a pawn and hold on for dear life, you can certainly do this. This would not be a mistake. On the other hand, instead of playing queen to d7, you don't have to sacrifice anything. You can play very simply bishop to f8, knight f1, and now h6. Okay, so instead of the knight 8, or instead of the queen to d7 version of this. From here, black can either play a Chigorin-style plan with knight to a5 and c5, or you can play a Breyer-style knight b8, knight to d7 plan. Both have been played, and either way, black is fine. Also, in fact, instead of h6, you could play the immediate knight a5 and c5 if you like. But it's not a bad rule of thumb that when white is ready to play bishop to g5, if you don't have a bishop already sitting on e7, to play h6. It's not necessary, but again, it's often pretty convenient to have that set up there in place. Okay, so finally, let's look at rook to e1. So here, queen d7, and now knight f1 is the main move we'll look at, but e takes d5 is playable too. Knight takes d5, knight e4, and now, even though there's no pin, h6 is still a useful move to keep the white pieces off of g5, especially a white knight, because black may at some point move the knight from d5, and he doesn't want to have problems on f7. So black is in fact doing quite well here. This occurred in a 2009 Bundesliga game between Polzin and Efemenko. Black won not in too many more moves. I mean, not right away, but it's a short game, 30 moves, and he won with a kingside attack. I believe he played queen g4, then he got kicked to g6 with the queen, and then he played f5 and just built up and won in pretty convincing fashion. So the main move is for white to play knight f1, and again, black wants to play bishop to f8, but then bishop to g5 would be a nuisance. So we'll play h6 first. And here, unlike the position that we mentioned before, knight e3 would drop the pawn because there's no rook on d1 hitting the queen after d takes e4, d takes e4. So knight e3 is no good, which leaves knight to g3. Now bishop f8. Now black is ready at his leisure to play g6. He'll play rook a to d8, and then again decide what to do with the knight. Maybe play knight a5, c5, and so on. But if white plays knight to f5 to try to slow down g6, well, here black is fine. He plays knight a5 and c5, and whenever black wants to kick the knight away in these positions, he can just play king to h7 and then g6. And that's always sufficient. I mean, white could play queen to e3 or queen to d2 if he wants, but if black really wants to play g6, he can play knight to g8, and then white runs out of pieces with which to prevent that plan. So, bottom line, black is doing fine here, may even be slightly better. White doesn't have to play knight to f5, though, but again, in general, black has the fuller center, and so if white is not able to punish him in some way, in some concrete way, then there's no reason why black should be less than equal. So I think black is doing fine in these queen to e2 variations, and really black has nothing to fear here. All right, so next we'll move on to other systems. We're getting close to the end of the series. There's a lot of theory in the variations that we still have to look at, but there aren't that many more systems. So we can look at anti-marshals. I think that's next. Maybe we'll look at we have to look at the Marshall, of course. We'll look at the Yates variation, maybe some systems with d3, and then finally various systems in the closed where white plays 9h3, and then there's the Breyer and the Chigorin and the Zaitsev and some lesser lines as well. All right, so plenty to look forward to. We'll get on with that next time, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.